Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News Extra, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. Netanyahu is asked to halt all parts of the agreement with Hamas until bodies are returned, whilst Trump threatens to go in and kill them over reported executions. Meanwhile, the US president says Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has agreed to stop buying Russian oil as he plans another meeting with Putin in Hungary. And French Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu has survived two no-confidence votes in Parliament after he pledged to suspend Macron's pension plan. Now, an Israeli politician has called on Benjamin Netanyahu to halt all parts of the agreement with Hamas until all bodies of the hostages are returned. Earlier today, the Red Cross facilitated the return of 30 more Palestinian bodies back to Gaza after Hamas handed over another 2 Israeli bodies last night. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump has threatened to go in and kill Hamas if he says they continue to kill people in Gaza. To discuss this and all of today's stories, I'm joined by news editor of Arabian Gulf Business Insight, Shane McGinley, and correspondent and columnist Gemma White. Shane and Gemma, thank you so much for joining me this evening. A lot's been going on, as we know, when it comes to what's been happening between Israel and Hamas. And we're meant to see the return of hostages at the start of the week. Is Hamas continuing to use the bodies of the hostages as leverage because they were meant to be returned, they've trickled in, and it's been quite a difficult situation?
Yeah, it's been quite piecemeal what's happening. Now, I think when it comes to this situation, I think 3 things are true here. I think one, Hamas is keeping hold of some of the bodies in order to retain some of their leverage. And you don't quite know where that's come from. Has that come from the top down, or is it, small groups making their own decisions about this? 2, they know where the bodies are buried, but they are buried under rubble and they can't get to them. And 3, they've been moving around so much they don't know where some of the bodies are. So I do think it's across all 3 of those. Now, they've returned 9 of the 28 bodies so far. But Israel is said to believe that Hamas knows where there are another 6 bodies. So now, Hamas has said it's handed over all the bodies that it has, but now it needs access to specialist equipment. And we've seen that Turkey is sending in 81 people to go and help, perhaps with retrieval with the bodies. They've got a lot of experience due to earthquakes in the country and retrieving bodies. So now, what's also interesting is it's also come at a time when Israel has returned 120 bodies of Palestinian prisoners back to Israel. Now, this hasn't been verified, but there are sources saying that the bodies showed signs of having been beaten and tortured, and also that the bodies were handcuffed and tied together at the feet, and they were returned with no names, just numbers. So what we could be seeing here is retribution on Hamas's part.
And I also read that story today, and it was from a doctor at Al Nasser Hospital, which is within Gaza, and he spoke about the return of those Palestinian bodies and the blindfolds and how difficult it's been for those people. So there are 2 sides to this in many respects. But Shane, it's quite interesting because over the past week or so, we've been seeing Hamas almost recuperate. It's come out of hiding. Yeah. We've seen violence on the streets of Gaza. Hamas has recruited more people to join the militant group. And President Trump has now threatened to go in and kill Hamas on his latest social media post.
Yeah, which, if you kind of look at it, after most of these conflicts, the next sort of stage is generally like the civil war. If you look at sort of Afghanistan, if you look at Libya, so it does look like as if Hamas has come in and Israel has sort of pulled out in terms of the sort of dominant force. So it kind of leaves a bit of a vacuum. So it does look like that at the top of Hamas, it doesn't appear to be sort of great cohesion in terms of leadership, and maybe there's a lot of infighting because we've heard of all of the top brass of Hamas who've been attacked or killed. So maybe there's not one defining sort of leadership, and there could be. This is all speculation, but I'm just guessing, looking at previous sort of conflicts, that's generally the trend that leads to it. So I think. Part of me was a bit annoyed because we only got sort of these statements on sort of Truth Social from Trump in, just not long before we came on air. And the first thing I did kind of think was that, okay, he's going to go in and be the police of Gaza, when he didn't sort of make any kind of similar statements when the Israelis were in killing 67,000 sort of local residents. So I kind of don't really put much weight into that. It's kind of just sort of the gangster president sort of comment. But I think what is more important is the language that the people who are part of the negotiation are saying, and what they're referring to Hamas and the bodies delivering situation. They're calling it a logistical problem, and that there's issues in finding the bodies, which I'm inclined to believe, because there was a report on CBS News in the US saying that the reason they can't find all of the bodies. Because originally I was thinking, they should know where they all are. They kidnapped them, they brought the hostages, they should know where they are, even though it's the middle of a warfare. But the issue is that a lot of the Hamas commanders who were in charge of a lot of the people were killed during the warfare. So a lot of the chain of information has probably broken down, and you don't know where they are. So I think then if you look at Mike Waltz, he seems to be the sensible voice in all of this, and he's the US ambassador to the United Nations, and he's come out and said that there could be US forces as part of a sort of a general recovery group that could be made up of maybe sort of Brits, and you said earlier that there could be some Arabs involved, and I think that would be the way forward, because that would give some legitimacy to potential delays in finding the bodies, because as you're saying, Turkey's been involved. So I think if there's an international group of forces that are looking and supporting finding these bodies, if there are delays, then it won't sort of escalate into a sort of a tit for tat, which has already happened.
Yeah.
It has happened, and we are seeing right now things escalate quite quickly after the first phase of the ceasefire was implemented.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are saying this is a concern because Hamas has reasserted itself. But in that 20-point plan, it's clear that Donald Trump wants Hamas to disarm. So the big question is right now, when are we going to get this international security force in to make sure that the people of Gaza, the Palestinians themselves, are safe, because they right now caught in the crosshairs here again, and to make sure Hamas follows through and does disarm. But politically, they don't seem to want to be leaving.
No, right now, like both Israel and Hamas are complaining to the mediators that neither side is upholding their side of the bargain, so to speak. And Hamas has said that since it's come into effect, more than 20 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli fire. And there was reports of drone strikes as well, which they've denied, but across a few different areas as well. So it seems like the looseness of the plan and the vagueness, that's what we're seeing down on the ground. We're seeing a vagueness, we're seeing a non-cohesion, we're not seeing, this is going to happen by this time. So I think the actions on the ground are just a reaction to the wishy-washiness of the plan.
So do you think they went for declaring peace too soon?
I think, I do. I think Trump wanted to be done with it. He wanted to say, the plan's done, we've ended the war, because that was one of the main points in the text. It basically said, this is the end of the war. That was one of the big things that was written. But as America knows, as you mentioned Afghanistan earlier, the signing of something, or is just the beginning. It's
because if you leave a vacuum, something has to fill it, and it could be worse. Like if you look at in Libya, when Gaddafi was gone, and everyone was like, "Okay, he's gone. Let's have a new start." And I remember I went to Libya quite soon after when they started flights again, and it was a complete warfare. But that still hasn't recovered, and that was like what 5-6 more years ago or something. So you know, sometimes if you get rid of the evil force, then what replaces is even worse.
And I think these are the big questions when it comes to this 20-point peace plan, is what comes next? Who's going to govern Gaza? What's going to be the board of peace? When is that going to come into play? And also, we must remember, we talk about the hostages' bodies, but the UN says 80% of buildings have either been destroyed
or rubble.
Or just rubble. So Gaza right now needs so many things to come into play to happen, but we're just waiting for that momentum to pick up and if they can move forward with this. So thank you so much for your thoughts on that. Stay right there as we move on to another story now. And President Trump has said Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has agreed to stop buying Russian oil. Trump's also had a phone call with Putin ahead of Zelenskyy's visit tomorrow and arranged to meet the Russian leader in Budapest. Here's a reminder of what Trump told reporters about Modi.
No, we were not happy with him buying oil from Russia, because that lets Russia continue on with this ridiculous war where they've lost 1.5 million people, by the way. Russia's lost 1.5 million people, soldiers mostly. This is a war that should have never started, but it's a war that Russia should have won in the first week, and they're going into the 4th year. And I want to see it stop. So I was not happy that India was buying oil. And he assured me today that they will not be buying oil from Russia. That's a big stop.
3, 4, 5.
True that, what Donald Trump said. I think Russia thought they would be in and out within a week, and no one imagined we'd be 4 years in, Shane.
Well, he thought he could end it in 24 hours as well.
But he has admitted it's been a lot more difficult than he ever would have imagined.
Because you need to get the finer points, as we discovered in the last story.
It's all very complicated, but in many respects...
This is very complicated too.
This one is. Yeah. And Donald Trump is, I will just give him credit for one thing, he's not giving up.
Yeah.
He's going back to the table, back and forth, back and forth. And let's talk a little bit about the shift when it comes to India. And I find this quite interesting because can the US ever force India to stop buying Russian oil?
I would have. We spoke about this a couple of weeks ago when initially Trump said that he was going to put higher tariffs on India because they're continuing to buy Russian oil. And I wouldn't. And I think I did say then that I didn't think that India would stop. But actually, when you dig into the detail of it, there's a lot of sort of opposing and complicated forces that are working in this regard. So I think on one side, India is trying to get a better trade deal with the US. So I think this is going to be a bargaining chip as part of that. And you know, Trump has changed international negotiations completely. So everyone has to have what is your bargaining chip going in. So this is going to be one of them. So India can say, okay, we will stop buying Russian oil because they want to get something that's bigger. What that is, I don't know at this moment. But when you look into just the oil situation, so around about a third of India's oil comes from Russia at the moment, and they've been quite beneficial in terms of when the war started, they were getting hefty discounts on Russian oil because Russian oil was no longer going to Europe, so there was an excess of it. And they were getting quite big discounts up to sort of like maybe 20%. But recently, because of a couple of things, one, Ukraine was attacking Russian sort of oil facilities, which meant that there was less oil to go around, so they had to push the price up. And also they need more revenue to support the actual war itself. So now they're only getting about like a 7% discount, the actual costs of it and the benefits to India have gone down, while at the same time, the alternative of buying it, so their second biggest suppliers are, say, Iraq, for example. So if you look at OPEC, the price of oil on the general market has gone down about 12%. So the difference between the discounted Russian oil and normal oil is now quite slim. So India's probably done the math and thought, well, actually, if we be seen to make a concession to Donald Trump, which will obviously keep him very happy, we will then get something else. But actually, we're not really going to lose that much, but the actual optics will look pretty good. So long story short, I was really surprised when India said this, but when you dig into it, I'm thinking they're possibly being very smart.
I have a slightly different point of view on it, but Gemma, so what my whole question here is, we know that President Putin and Trump had a phone call a little bit earlier. They've arranged to meet, and obviously Trump's putting pressure on India because he wants the war in Ukraine to stop. But India almost came out and denied that the call had ever happened.
Yeah, they have said we're not aware of this call happening. So maybe you're
That's
right.
a bit strange
Maybe
that
they're
India's
playing a
not
really
coming out
good
and saying
diplomatic
it.
game, though. You know, it's to deny things in public.
Yeah.
Wait and see how things pan out, and then be like, oh yeah, no, they did have a call. It was just a matter of like national security or something. You know, they can always hide behind semantics.
Because all the oil that is now going to India, the other big sort of player is China, and they get a lot of oil from Russia. So if Trump is obviously escalating the sort of China trade war, so you kind of think, is that part of the whole longer game as well, is to try and use that as a bargaining chip, and China could then go, okay, well, we'll stop using Russian oil. And who are the benefactors going to be? It'll obviously be can you think of anyone else who produces oil? And
None
I can't
really
think of anyone spring to mind. The US obviously, but they want to drill, baby, drill, and keep the price down. And OPEC wants to open the taps and supply more. So there's a lot of competing factors, I think, going into this. But oil is, at the end of the day, is Russia's main revenue source, which supplies the war. So if they lose oil, then they lose their resources. Then they can't fight as much as possible. And as Trump said, it's gone on for 4 years when Putin was hoping for a week. So if he's going to just cut off their prime revenue stream and force Putin to actually have to do something, then that is a smart move. And I'm willing to admit that Trump's played a good card on that one.
But what I find fascinating is we're hearing these rumbles that Donald Trump could be meeting Vladimir Putin again very soon. He's clearly said this after the phone call today. We heard it from Donald Trump and Caroline Levitt. Absolutely fascinating to me, because it will be these two world leaders meeting with it twice within 4 months.
Yeah.
And I think that could show Donald Trump's dedication to trying to get some sort of solution.
Also, this power that we've discussed on the show, him kind of finding his power and realising just how much of it he has with regards to leverage. Now, we don't know who called who. Did Putin reach out to Trump? Did Trump reach out to Putin? I am inclined to believe that Putin reached out to Trump because the timing is so interesting. Now, it's interesting for 3 reasons. Obviously, Trump is meeting Zelenskyy tomorrow in the White House, and they will be further discussing whether or not Trump is going to sell Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. It also comes as Trump has said publicly that Modi is going to stop buying oil, although there is some, sort of, we're not really sure around that. And also it comes as Putin has cancelled his big Arab-Russia summit. Now, that's been in the works. It was announced in April, and it was supposed to happen yesterday. And it was supposed to be this big global showcase of Middle Eastern and Russian dynamics and relations and friendships. And it has been completely overshadowed by Trump being in Gaza. And Putin has had to cancel this summit. Now, it's a bit like, having a birthday party and no one turning up, and you sort of saying, oh, well, there was other stuff happening anyway. And it has really underlined the fact that Moscow's influence in the Middle East is waning, because I believe there were only 2 nations who said they were going to come, so he cancelled it anyway. So the timing is impeccable for Putin to reach out to Trump and be like, okay, maybe it's time to talk.
And it is interesting because we talk about Russia's influence, especially in Syria, because we saw the new Syrian leader meeting Vladimir Putin yesterday. And we know that before the regime change, Russia did have a strong air base within Syria. But things are not the same as they were just a few years ago. So a really interesting conversation. I always kind of wait to see how Zelenskyy and Trump's meetings will go. I think that's a fascination of the Oval Office, and we'll see how that plays out tomorrow. Thanks for your thoughts there. Let's move on to another story now. And French Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu has survived 2 no-confidence votes in Parliament today, following his pledge to suspend Macron's pension plan. After the vote, he told reporters he's relieved and that the debates on the budget and other challenges will start now. Oh, wow. He's lived another day, let's put it that way. It's been an absolute roller coaster ride. I just think French politics has really been on a I don't know. I don't even know what's going on, but
it's a soap opera.
It's absolutely.
Yeah.
Lecornu, the man to fix it, resigned, came back. What a carry on.
I thought Brexit was a roller coaster, you know, having three prime ministers in 5 years. But France has had he's the 5th prime minister to quit in 3 years. Now that leaves Brexit absolutely, you know, standing. Brexit looks amateurish in comparison to this. So yeah, he was appointed prime minister on September the 9th. He resigned on October the 6th, backlash over his government choices. And then Macron reinstated him on October the 10th. So that's just a few weeks of kind of political roller coastering, as you said. And he has just survived 2 votes of no confidence. Now, the first vote was brought around by the far left party, France Unbowed. Because at the moment in France, because of the snap election that Macron called previously, there is no real majority. You have the centre, you have the far left, and you have the far right. So the first vote of confidence was brought by the far left, the second was brought by the far right. Now, he survived the second vote by quite a larger margin, and I was left wondering whether it's because people actually wanted support him or they just didn't want to support Marine Le Pen and the far-right party.
But he scraped through the first one.
Yes, he scraped through the first one.
The first one was a bit of a challenge.
But the second one was by a bigger margin because that was brought by the far-right party.
I think the second one was to do with the socialists, and some of them abstained rather than vote. So I think that's kind of the critical thing, is that there's been a lot of sort of behind-the-scenes negotiations saying, OK, we'll give you this, we'll give you that, and I think that was evident in the second vote.
Yeah, and his negotiations are clearly with the leftists. He is not negotiating at all with the far right, which is interesting because their popularity is growing, as we've seen across other European countries as well. So yes, he has won the support. He lives to fight another day, which is, you know, all one can hope for in politics. And now he has the task of forming the government, putting together the 2026 budget, and also, I think, very importantly, rebuilding the damage this has done to France's reputation on the global stage. They look amateurish, it looks chaotic, and they need to start getting back some of their political dignity.
I think France always looks a bit chaotic at the best of times.
Yeah, and I find it fascinating because we're talking about this and we're talking about France in this way, and we must remember it's the second biggest economy in Europe. It's a nuclear arm. It's got lots of military power. It's, you know, every time we talk about Ukraine and Russia, if we want to link it back to the last story, it's the coalition of the willing. Macron has been the face of that. We see Macron at that summit in Egypt with Donald Trump after the Israel-Hamas peace plan. So it's not a good look.
Do you not find lately that so many leaders, though, are doing really well internationally, but not domestically?
Well, that's what you have to do if you're struggling abroad. They would say, like, oh, let's have a war, because then you can focus on it. You can be the big statesman on them. Although not when poor Keir Starmer, and do you remember Donald Trump the other day when he was embarrassed on the stage? That was really cringe, and I felt really sorry for him.
Poor Keir Starmer's having a bad time at home.
Yeah,
Then he had that
and a bad time
on the
He's having a bad time all over.
I think he can't. Yeah, he can't get it right.
Win.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, but and like, you know, and you think like Italy is sort of like the shambles as well, and then you've got sort of very staid sort of Britain, and then you've got France in the middle, which is, you know, the champagne politics. So, but I do think it can be turned around if he can sort of smooth over with the socialists. And we were laughing about this earlier. It comes down to the pension, and it's 2 years from 62 to 64, which I guess if you're 62 is a big deal because you don't work for 2 more years. But this is what they need to sort of phase out, because that is what all of the French and all last week, I think, or the week before, we were talking about the unions going on strike. So this is the main sort of focus. So they need to sort of push that aside. And I think they need to sort of get back to basics of running the country, fix the schools, the infrastructure, you know, all of these things.
But they've got no money to do that.
Well, that's what I was coming to next. And because if you look at the debt situation, it's 116% of GDP is the entire debt, which to put that into perspective, the average which is allowed in the EU is 60%. So that's way above it. The UK is on 95, so it's a little bit actually better. The US is on 123%. But And they even describe it as excessive deficit procedure, which I think is a nice way of saying you are really in the gutter. And so even if they want to get rid of the pension plan, they want to invest, they can't do any of that because the budget needs to, you either need to tax more or cut costs. That's just basic math. So the French guy, I really feel sorry for him because there's not that many options to it. Or just get an IMF bailout, which there has been a lot of discussion about recently, which would be incredibly embarrassing for one of the biggest countries.
I think that would be incredibly embarrassing.
Yeah.
And I don't think I've ever thought that France would get an IMF bailout.
No.
And I think many people probably thought that in respects. I know it happened to Greece, but it was a different case and it was a different scenario. Yeah. But we are talking about France right now. And it's quite interesting because I think a lot of people are saying Macron is in power till 2027. That's when the next election happens. But there are calls from within France for him to actually just say, OK, I'm going to step down. We're going to hold another election because we're kind of lurching from one crisis to the next crisis. But I think that's just not going to happen, is it?
I can't see Macron resigning.
No, I think if the IMF bailout was looking like it was looming, then that's when you want to get out. You don't want to be stuck with that as the legacy in the final chapter of his sort of biography. So I think that if it gets so bad in terms of the actual finances, and if that is definitely looming, I think he would go. But I don't think he's going to go willingly at the moment. He doesn't strike me as the sort of character that's going to back away from a fight.
He's still so young. He's 47.
Wow.
He is still,
is he?
yeah, he's still so, like, really young.
Wow.
And so, obviously his political career will not be over. Like, this man's going to go off and do much more. And I do wonder whether it's an advantage or a disadvantage to have Macron, you know, supporting you these days, because he does just seem so unpopular in his own country.
And that is one of the big problems.
Yeah.
And I think that there's going to have to be a serious consideration and discussion in his own party, because right now Lecornu's there steadying the ship for as long as he can, but if that doesn't work out, can he then go for another prime minister? Like, is it just going to be the constant? And you know how unsettling it is in a country when there's a regime change all the time and there's no stability in politics. But really interesting conversation. Thank you so much. Stay right there now as we move on to another story. And the head of the UK Security Services has said China poses a daily threat to the United Kingdom. Sir Ken McCullum revealed MI5 had disrupted Chinese activity in the past week alone. It follows claims from Boris Johnson's former advisor, Dominic Cummings, who believes Beijing had obtained vast amounts of classified information over the years. OK, I mean, Dominic Cummings, I don't know if we could really... Anyway, thoughts on Dominic Cummings, we'll park those. I think
it's probably for the best.
Yeah, it's probably for the best. Anyway, let's move on and talk about the spy case, because it's absolutely fascinating. It's like an onion. There's so many layers to this case. It's very difficult to understand. So it's all worrying, it's all concerning. I mean, what's the story here?
So, so you thought Indian oil or Gaza was complicated. This is another level. So, OK, I'll try and slim it down really quickly. So, long story short, so basically it's the two Christophers. Christopher Cash, who was a former director of a Chinese think tank, and then there was Christopher Berry, who was a researcher with a senior lawmaker. And before we start, I should say they deny all wrongdoing.
Yes,
so
they do.
You know, we don't want to get into the merits of that. So they were arrested, and this is when it gets the important bit. It's the Official Secrets Act, which came in after World War I, not to go back too far, after Germany. And it's basically if you can get accused of giving official documents or communication to the enemy. And this is the important bit. It's classed as the enemy, and it's the threat level that each country has. So the problem is that for the Crown Prosecution Service is that China was not declared as a high threat by the previous Tory government when all of this started during Rishi Sunak. So the Crown Prosecution Service said that there wasn't enough evidence to say that there was evidence to be given to the enemy because the threat level of China wasn't that high. And that's why it didn't get through. And there's all talk of the 5% that was needed. So there's all of this talk about, well, OK, how high should the threat level of China be? and again, this is when the money comes in, because I always think that's always the root of everything. It's because the UK is trying to get trade deals with China. So if they annoy China and call them the enemy, China's then not going to put billions into UK infrastructure and
technology.
Trade. And we're talking about 100 billion here, so it's a big number. So basically, that is where Keir Starmer is caught. And we got to remember, Keir Starmer used to be the head of the Crown Prosecution Service. So he's a man who goes very much by the letter of the law. And if the letter of the law says that you will get accused if you've given documents to the enemy, and China has not been declared as an enemy, then that's the outcome. And we can all give out and say, yes, there's loads of Chinese spies running around the embassy and in London, but the UK government has decided that they're not classed as a high enough threat to be considered an enemy, and that's just the facts.
Yes, definitely. And the Christopher Berry, Christopher Cash, the two men at the core of this story, they met in China, and that's how their meeting was formally made. And they said they were friends and they did nothing. So they're denying any sort of espionage accusations against them. But the big question is, this story is not going away.
No.
This story is
political football, basically.
It's carrying on. It's carrying on. We even saw Keir Starmer come back from recess yesterday, dressed PMQs in Prime Minister's questions, and the first thing he spoke about was this case.
Yeah.
So even though we're here in the UK, this is not going away, and it's not looking good, and our head's going to roll.
So no heads have rolled so far, and everyone is very much in self-preservation mode. Now, if you know anything about British politics, people are very good at self-preservation. Yes, and misdirection, So there are two names which have kind of come to the fore. If you're talking about where might the blame land. Now, this is obviously just speculation. Now, one of them is Jonathan Powell. He's the Prime Minister's National Security Advisor. And his name is being bandied around in ways that if I was Mr. Powell, I would perhaps be feeling a little bit nervous. Because as well, what they do in British politics is they love a scapegoat. So now the Tory party, they say that Powell has lots of questions to answer about his role in the collapse of the trial, and they suggest that it was actually him who failed to give the Crown Prosecution Service the witness statements that they needed to secure a conviction. Now, the other name being bandied about is the Director of Public Prosecution, Stephen Parkinson. Now, he oversaw the case. Now, he said that he tried to get the information from the government, but that witness statements did not meet the threshold to prosecute. And as you said, this 5%, what it is that he said the evidence was 5% short of securing a conviction. Such a tiny margin.
Yeah, and it's all to do with the threat level, because even though the MI5 guy is coming out and saying there's lots of spies, and like last week that they had implemented, it's all to do with the time when they were arrested and when the crime took place, because you can only be accused of something when the crime took place, you can't just change the law and then retrospectively add it. So that is the problem. I think what Keir Starmer is that a lot of the time he doesn't take action quick enough, and kind of then the story lingers on for a long time. Like, do you remember the Angela Rayner story? That should have been done really, really quick, and she should have been just, out really quickly. But I think he lets the stories linger on, and then the stink of them gets more and more. Yeah, exactly. And then he's just seen to be reacting rather than just taking charge. And I think that is the problem. And it probably comes down to the fact that he was head of the Crown Prosecution Service. So he's like, we need to read all of the case notes and all the details, which is honourable. But in 24/7 news, you need to be able to make decisions quickly, move on to the next one. So I think that's probably one of his character flaws, which I think is just going to continue throughout however long his premiership is.
And it's just fascinating because amidst all of this, China was meant to be building a super embassy in London. It's bought the property already, but that's been delayed again. And the housing minister, Steve Reed, who actually took over from Angela Rayner, did that announcement today. So lots happening in British politics. But I always think there's a spy story is always fascinating.
Yeah,
it is fascinating. It's sort of my mind always just goes back to the Cold War. The height of spying, but you'd realise it still exists. It's just it's much more high tech now. It's not kind of furtive meetings by the duck pond in Hyde Park. It's just a lot more high tech.
It's amazing in many respects how it all happens under a sort of cloak, and then when it's lifted, you realise how simple it is, but effective in many respects. Thank you so much for your thoughts on that. Now, it's that time of the show where Gemma and Shane have chosen two of their quirkiest stories of the day. Gemma, I hadn't seen this until you mentioned it before we came on air, and this video has been doing the rounds, and it's absolutely frightening. Tell us about it.
So this video has been all over social media. So you'll see this lady just is literally about to step in front of a tram. You see it from all different angles here. There you see the driver reacting. Now, this is in Turkey. And she's at a tram station, and the security guard at the very last second prevents her from stepping in front of the tram and possibly, you know, obviously being killed. Now, you'll see, if you look closer at the video, she's got earpods in. So she can't really hear what's going on here. They're flagging it up. But also, I'm like, obviously, it's great that the security guard reacted, you know, super fast and she's okay. But it made me start thinking about, are we just wandering around in our own little bubbles? You know, you're not in a supermarket aisle where, you know, nothing bad's going to happen to you. You know, a box of cereal might fall in you and that's about it. You are at a tram station. There are fast-moving trams coming through and you're still not paying attention to your surroundings. And it made me kind of wonder, are we all just kind of walking around in our own little bubbles?
Isn't it impressive how quickly the tram stopped, though?
I think everything. Like the security guard is impressive. It's
was that some sort of AI?
She's been very, very lucky. And afterwards, she kind of is a bit like, what happened?
It was quite fascinating because if you watch the video, you can actually hear the tram beeping, and she still was completely unaware of that. And I must admit, sometimes I walk around with earphones in. And you are completely clueless.
Yes.
And sometimes I might walk across the road and I think, oh my gosh, I didn't even look.
Yeah.
And you have to make a conscious decision now because you could put on music, put on a podcast, be in a phone conversation.
Be texting or something,
Texting someone, and you're just on a different planet. And I think we are walking around a little bit in our own spacesuits of tech.
Exactly, and I think it's even when they launched sort of the tram in Dubai, I remember the amount of cars that crashed because people were trying to beat and go through it, and all of these things happen.
I did that on my bike once in London.
Trying to get past through the tram. Because the one in Dublin...
You're still with us, so we assume you were successful, yes.
But yeah, I hope the guy got some sort of medal that pulled her back. Was it a guy?
The security guard, I mean, his reactions are...
Phenomenal.
Phenomenal, yeah.
But it's
a good news story.
It is a great news story, but I do also think sometimes it's good to not always be plugged in.
Yes.
But it's hard because we're so used to it now. And I think it's a fascinating story. And Shane, yours is about...
Yeah, I know. I just realised if anyone watches this a lot, they think I'm obsessed with funerals, but...
Funeral correspondent.
That could be a good one. So this is in India. So there was a 47-year-old former Air Force veteran by the name of Mohan Lal, and I apologise if I've murdered his pronunciation of his name. So he went from the Air Force to volunteering, and whatever was going through his mind, he wanted to see... He was probably feeling unloved, God love the poor man.
Think about more than that.
So he staged his own funeral to see how many people would show up and how sad they would be at his passing. I'd imagine probably not too happy because the whole Indian ceremony going, and then he stood up and when they were about to light it, and instead put on an effigy, kind of like a Guy Fawkes, I'm guessing, and then burnt that. And he said, I wanted to witness it myself and know how much affection people would give me. It sounds really sad.
I feel really sad for him because we know he's a veteran.
Yeah, but you're not saying, did he not know that you had to? I'm sure there's people who would be quite annoyed by this facade.
You could have popped round for a cup of tea and said, we friends.
Friends.
You don't stage your own
because a lot of people did show up, and he was probably held in quite esteem if he was a veteran, and he was into. I know. I'm thinking this poor guy, and it kind of got me thinking. Like, have you ever thought about your own funeral?
No, you made us last time.
Yes,
you made us select our coffins.
Coffins, yes.
Shane, honestly.
A mermaid coffin, I think we came up with.
You dogs. You had dogs with tiaras.
Yes. I don't know. It's not something I think about every day, my own funeral, I'm not going to lie.
Mo-handed.
Yes, mo-handed.
yeah.
But I think it's quite dark to organise your own funeral.
You could have had a party instead.
Yeah, exactly.
See who comes to your party.
Yes.
Or just the amount of sort of stress people must have gone for thinking this poor guy has died, and then you find out he's not. Like, it sounds like the start of a great crime novel to me, and that later he will be found dead, probably.
And you had to, like, hold your breath for quite, you know, like, not look like you're
And the
breathing,
costs of it as well, because
so-
I imagine it's very ceremonial, and there's a lot involved and expense in sort of lavish Indian.
And a lot of therapy required, you know, seeing someone rise up from a coffin.
But at least he was happy that he was happy with the amount of people that showed up
that's
and the level of crying.
Would you still be his friend if you went to that funeral and then he stood up?
I think I'd find the comedy in it, definitely. After I'd calmed the kids down, you know, and everything, and they'd gone to therapy for a few years, I think I would, be like, oh, that was actually quite a good gag.
Yeah, the problem is that he's 74, so he's probably going to die soon, and people are going, oh, I'm not believing that, I'm not going now.
He's the boy that cried wolf.
Yeah, exactly.
No one's going to turn up to his actual funeral.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you so much for the stories on that. They were very interesting. And everyone at home, don't think about your funeral.
No, 2 weeks I'll have another one.
2 weeks to have another one. So thanks too much to today's guest, news editor of Arabian Gulf Business Insight, Shane McGinley, and correspondent and columnist Gemma White. And that's all from us on W News Extra. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Of course, follow us on X. GNT with Tom Burgess-Watson is coming up next. Goodbye and thank you.